Though the angelic eyes of this blue-eyed child destiny speaks out, he swore on the Quran that his grandmother was Armenian. Who knows this little boy's history? Maybe his grandmother was one of those girls who were captured for the harems. Maybe his parents were forced to adopt Islam. How many of such Assyrian or Armenian fates are known today?
We have very much documentation that has come out very recently. And it has to do with the beatification process of the Armenian Catholic Archbishop of Mardin, Ignaz Maloyan. He was declared a saint about 3 years ago. And during that beatification process, many documents written by Catholic priests in Mardin came to life after having been in archives for a long time. There were 3 French Dominican priests, Jacques Retouret, a famous person in his day, Beret och Hyacinthe Simon, who all wrote a chronicle of what was going on in Diyarbakir and Mardin area. Also, there was a young fellow, Ishak Armalto, in the Syrian Catholic monastery, who wrote a chronicle. And then a young fellow in the Dar es Zafaran monastery, who was Syrian Orthodox, also wrote a contemporary study. Other type of material that is coming out is material from Turkish archives, from the military historical archives and from the Archive of the President. The Archive of the President gives us such things as orders for deportation of various groups. However, the Dominican priest that I was talking about, especially Jacques Retouret, was very interested in actually getting a good statistics for all of the differing religious groups. Now, this material is only for the Diyarbakir province, but he comes up then with proportions, killings of Syrian Catholics and Armenian Catholics of over 80% had been lost during the period from April 1915 until November 1916, when he left Mardin for somewhere else.
In 1915, the 1st Assyrian Regular Battalion, under the command of Patriarch Mar Shimun, joined the Russian army. Gradually, they were becoming more experienced. They played a vital role in the struggle against the Turkish army and Kurdish hordes. In 1917, October, the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia led to the definite withdrawal of the Russian forces. Taking advantage of Russia's temporary weakness, the Ottoman army attacked. Severe battles took place between the Turks and Assyrians. In 1918, Mar Shimun went to the Kurdish fortress of Kona Shahar in Persia on the advice of the British Captain Gracie to negotiate with the Kurds on future cooperation. The brave patriarch and all of his accompanying friends fell into the trap set by the false Kurds. In revenge of the bloody incident, the commander of the Assyrian army, Agaputros, and his 7,000 courageous Highlanders shattered Chara, the den of the Kurdish brigands, in 3 days of perilous fighting. Over that time span, thousands of Assyrians were slain in Armenia and its surroundings.
As we know, the Assyrians of Julamerk were arched by the Russian army in 1915 to start their liberation war against the Ottoman Empire under the leadership of their spiritual leader Marshimun Benyamin. But the Russian Empire did nothing to support its ally. The consequences were disastrous. There are numerous facts, telegrams where the Assyrians asked for Russian help. Horrible massacres began in Gavar. 30 villages were entirely destroyed. In one of the telegrams it is said, 50,000 Assyrians will soon be killed unless you help us. Unfortunately, the help would never come. It was the Tsarist government's fault that the greatest part of the Assyrians in the Van Vilayet were killed. Only a small part of them could flee to Urmia. I would like to bring a parallel between the Russia's 1914 withdrawal from Atrpatakan and the 1915 withdrawal from Van. In both cases, Armenians and Assyrians had great losses. The same thing happened to them in 1918, with the fault of the Great Britain, who had taken on the defendant's role of national minorities. In future, Armenians and Assyrians had to move from Western Armenia and Urmia to Hamadan, and from there to Iraq, having enormous losses. Here, in Iraq, the British government again used the two nations for its dirty benefits.
The story of ravages, slaughters, and deportations can be continued. The losses and atrocities knew no limits. Over the period of the First World War, the Assyrians were subjected to the genocide committed by the Ottoman government and lost 2/3 of its race.
Il est évident que
There is no doubt that genocide means mass destruction of a nation, but this is more than a mass destruction. According to the Charter of the United Nations, adopted in December 1948, genocide means a deliberate act against any civilian population with intention to exterminate the nation's physical existence and culture. For the Syrians, it was the very mass destruction and, of course, a deliberate extermination of the nation both physically and culturally. The same thing happened to the Armenians. A considerable population was forcibly deported. Another part was entirely demolished by the Turks and Kurds. There are written documents of various authors, including the missionaries, particularly in Urmia, who even stayed in the first front line rather than leave the Assyrians. We have also British, French, Russian and German diplomatic and military sources.
The Assyrian delegation, headed by the Chaldean Patriarch Joseph Emmanuel Thomas, Bishop Barsom of the Syriac Orthodox Church, attorneys Said Namek, Rustam Nejib, and Jean Zbouni were invited to the Peace Congress in Paris in 1919. First, they presented a program on building autonomy, then an independent state. Famous Assyrian figure Malik Yonan had meetings with Lloyd George Clemenceau and with other high-ranking officials. Unfortunately, the Assyrians gained nothing in Paris except disappointment. The same fate was awaiting them at the Sèvres Conference in 1920. Even in 1922 to 1923, at the Lausanne Conference, the Assyrian case, put in the agenda by the League of Nations, was condemned to failure.
Today, Assyrians, together with Armenians, struggle against the ignorance of the genocide. Both nations have enriched the world's civilization treasury with such historical pages every nation would be proud of. One of the world's ancient nations had huge losses during the years 1915 to 1918. We must bow our heads before the hundreds of thousands of Assyrians' graves without tombstones, because neither the Armenians nor the Assyrians had tombstones on their graves. More than 700,000 Assyrians became victims of Turkish yatagans.
After the historical disasters and confusion, the remains of the Assyrian nation, disappointed and forsaken by everyone, were living in the newly established Republic of Turkey in the cities of Diyarbakir, Mardin, Midyat, and the surrounding villages and regions. Living in these poor areas away from the central parts of Turkey, they were hidden and thus protected. They had an opportunity to survive, keep the language and traditions, go to their churches, but the memories of the bloody events were still fresh. According to some historical documents, there are a couple of thousand of half-Kurd Assyrians and Armenians of Hakkari who do not speak their native languages, though some of them speak in secret. The Turco-Cypriot conflict that arose in the 1970s revived the fear of another genocide. The Assyrians in Turkey fled their homes for foreign countries.
I think the immediate reasons were that they became afraid of a kind of anti-Christian ideology that resurged at the time of the Cyprus conflict. That was one important reason. That the Cyprus conflict was interpreted as a war between Muslims and Christians, and it was very acute. It was very near, and it involved Christians within the Turkish Republic in a very immediate way. So many of them were afraid that this is the beginning of a new genocide. So many of them felt that the faster we can get away from her, the better it is. So there was really a kind of wave out where one family left and dragged with it other related families.
قامو أخنن أختي أخنن هربت بيشخ مخنخراي قامو ناشن أختي ناشن بخاينا قريباي قامو ألمن أختي ألمن بواينا يخسراي وقامو شمن أختي شمن بقراينا أطوراي قامو تيول بسراوي لحقوياتا ناشناي قامو دنيا شخلوبي للزدق ديا تاريخاي قامو كتاود بصمونينا كم شمهيلا باربراي قامو ديوة بجلاجينا سهدواتا أمتاناي قامو أخنن أختي أخنن هربت بيشخ مخنخ راي
إزجتوتا آتوراي كلمن أدنا أجو حلبيلا.
The descendants of the wide scattered Assyrians continue their just struggle for the recognition of historical injustice and reestablishment of their trampled rights. Various historical archive documents and research papers are being studied and published to keep the world aware of the real picture of the greatest crime against humanity, the first genocide of the 20th century.
The last 8 years we have been working a lot about giving a lot of information, giving a lot of documentation about the genocide of the Assyrians. The Armenians have been working on this genocide for much longer time, and my experience as a politician here in Europe, we see that a lot of politicians in Europe do know about the genocide of the Armenians, but don't know anything about the genocide on the Assyrians. During the last 8 years, we have been doing a lot of political work to make the European politicians aware about the genocide of the Assyrians, and especially now Turkey want to be member of the European Parliament. And we think, as Assyrian people who work on this question, is that the 15 years we will get until Turkey will be member of the European Parliament, yes or not, during this time we have to work very hard and very careful with the Armenians together to get the recognition of the Assyrian and Armenian genocide.
Ասորիների ցեղասպանության խնդիրը մինչև վերջին տարիներս դուրս էր մնացել համաշխարհային.
The issue of the Assyrian genocide until recent years has so far been out of the limelight from the world community. But recently this question was attempted to be shown to the world by either European Assyrians or by Assyrians living all over the world. For the recognition of the issue, the progress made SAFO, the Assyrian Genocide Study Center Institute, an organization in the Netherlands, which has a sister organization in Great Britain by the name of the Firodil Institute. There are already a lot of scientific articles, books, and documentaries about that problem. There is some progress to show the world that today's Turkey has to recognize the Assyrian genocide, which was perpetrated by the hands of their ancestors. I would like to mention some very important research works, namely the book by Professor David Gaunt from Sweden, the book by Dr. Gabriela Yunin from Germany, and in 2007, the support of the Assyrian Genocide Study Center in Chicago, Illinois, USA, which published a brief history of the Assyrian genocide by co-authors Dr. Norman Solkach and myself. Besides all of this, I would like to mention that by the collective efforts of the Assyrians living in Europe, the Assyrian genocide issue was debated not only in the House of Commons in Great Britain, but also in the Swedish Parliament and particularly, which is most important to us, in 2007 in the European Parliament also.
One of the most significant human efforts is aspiration to morality. Our inner stability and even existence is regulated by it. It is the morality of our deeds that adds beauty and dignity to our life. With Einstein's words, we can evaluate and define nations' role and mission underneath this sky. Time has an incredible ability to erase everything from human recollection and sink the evil and goodness into oblivion. But there is a kind of recollection in the corners of which the moral echoes of our deeds are being collected. It is the reminiscence of the soul. History is an unchangeable essence with its numberless pages where the facts are being recorded and never pass into forgetfulness. There is a page in that very essence that cannot ever be forgotten. An unforgotten page of one nation.